Welcome to this session, Make Small Group Conferring Work in Grades 3 through 12. Hi, I am Christopher Lehman. I'm founding director of the Educator Collaborative. If we don't know each other already, you can scan that bio to learn more about me. You also, from that same page, will take you to the Educator Collaborative. You can also contact me if you'd like to have me work with you or your school district. I'd be happy to. During this session, please use the hashtag #TheEdCollab on whatever social media you're on, and please tag me at Chris Lehman, and you can tag the EdCollab if you'd like as well too, because I would love to hear your thoughts. I can respond to questions that you have, or I'd love to see other things that you are trying and doing as well too. So please use the hashtag and feel free to tag me as well. So this session is called Making Small Group Conferring Work in Grades 3 through 12. The reason why we're focusing specifically on grades 3 through 12 is a few. One is that our primary colleagues in kindergarten through second grade tend to do a lot of small group conferring already, guided reading, lots of other structures. Those have some specifics to them, which I love to support schools in. We just don't have time for that today. But also it tends to be a more regular occurrence in early childhood teaching. I'm here to either help you or encourage you to start for all of our upper grade and especially up into secondary teachers to make small group conferences a part of your practice. There are many good reasons for that, and I'll share those. So during our short session here, I can't possibly get to everything that we can talk about. We could have many sessions on this. So in this one, I'm purposefully going to highlight a few areas. One is a little bit of why. Then a lot of time I'm going to spend on helping you think about how to form small groups and who goes into them. And then just a little bit on how you might lead the small groups that you formed. There's plenty more that we can talk about. And again, please feel free to contact me if you and your district in particular are focusing on small group instruction and you'd like my support or support from my colleagues in the EdCollab. That QR code will take you to a contact form or take you to a page so you can find the contact form and write to us as well. So some things we'll get to, we won't get to everything, but hopefully this session will help you and maybe even inspire you as well. So just to clarify before we jump too far in, when we say small group, there's lots of different uses for that term. We might mean different things. So I want to clarify what we're talking about here. What we're not talking about is group work, putting kids together to work on a project. What we are talking about is small group conferring. So it's not, hey, you 4 students, this is the project that's due, figure it out. Instead, this is about strategically determining who needs to be in a group. And that's why we're going to spend a lot of time on that part, because that's the most challenging and most important of anything. So strategically deciding who needs to be in a group, then you lead that group to move them along their skill development or content development or whatever it is that you're working on with them. So it's strategically formed groups for specific goals that you have determined and you are in charge of. So let's think a little bit about the why. And I love analogies, so I'm going to use an analogy with you. This summer, I went to the Renaissance tour. I live in New York, so I was able to go to MetLife Stadium, where Beyonce performed. Yes, it was fantastic. Yes, I had a really great time. That was, you take one of the options was to take New Jersey Transit. So we took that, and they had these signs made for everyone taking transit because the crowd was huge and they were directing us, but I loved that. They had fun signs too. So on our way to Queen Bee, that's me. So first, just to say, she was gorgeous. Her voice is incredible. It was a great time. If you've gone, it was amazing. If you're about to go, you're going to love it. If you're going multiple times, I'm very jealous. I had major concert withdrawal after I saw it. I really wanted to go again. My bank account said no, but I really wanted to go again. It was really an incredible time. So all of that is to say, here's some of the why. When you attend a concert of someone that you really enjoy listening to, maybe one of your musical heroes, when you attend a great concert, it can feel like that musician is talking directly to you, that musician is singing just for you, that they're singing the songs that you want to hear, that they're sharing inspiration with just you. You can leave inspired and excited to do great things in the world. Many people talking about the Renaissance tour said they left feeling inspired. I think Oprah said something to that effect. By the way, the night that I was there, I think was the Oprah night, and I think also the Madonna night too. Now, the reality is Beyonce, of course, was not singing to only me or Oprah or Madonna. She was singing to the entire MetLife Stadium, the tens of thousands, I can't remember the exact thousands, but many, many multiples of tens of thousands of people all in the stadium listening to her perform. And what that means is that Beyonce and her crew decided, how do we put on the best show that most of the fans probably want to listen to? What are the things that almost everyone wants to hear and see? What that means is she put on a great show. What that also means is that she's not necessarily making the concert just for me. It's not all about me, but for this analogy, it will be. In the concert, there may or may not have been songs that I wish she sang, that I wish I heard, that weren't included, or others that perhaps I or you didn't know as well. And you were like, oh, this is an interesting song. I didn't know that. Beyonce, when she's putting on a show for an entire stadium worth of people, she's not addressing your specific individual needs, the things that you most want to hear. Instead, she's singing for everyone. So let's bring that analogy over to our classrooms. Every day, we are teaching our hearts out. Every day, whether you teach English language arts or your social studies teacher or science or whatever you do, we are teaching our hearts out, and there's something new every day. And when we're planning our teaching, we are doing the best that we can to address everyone, right? We're trying to figure out, what do most students in this class probably need? And so we are deciding our own set list. We're figuring out our greatest hits. We're trying to decide, just like Beyonce figured out the order of the songs that she was going to sing, we're deciding the order of our lessons. But there are students in our room who maybe, let's say it's writing, you've taught how to include and analyze text evidence in an essay that you're working on with them. And you taught a lesson on that. And then the next day, you moved on to transitions. There are students that need more time on how you include and analyze evidence. But you have had to move on to transitions because you're trying to figure out what most students need. And for a lot of us, you probably only have, what, like maybe 20 different lessons in a unit, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but it's not a lot. So when we're teaching the whole class, our teaching is trying to move our unit forward. But there are kids who have either stopped and stalled at different parts of that movement. And there's also students who already knew that thing you taught and they're ready to move ahead. And they need something new or need a new challenge. We have to plan a unit that moves forward because we only have so many days in the year. We only have so many days in a unit. But that doesn't mean that that's the only teaching we have to give to our students. And that also, unfortunately, means that not all students are with us. And I know you know that. I know the things I'm saying, you know. So when we think about small group instruction and small group conferring, what we can do inside of whatever the pace of our classroom is, if you choose to, is we can be strategic to not only give the concert, to not only say, hi, I am Beyonce, and I am performing to all of MetLife Stadium, but we also can offer that special and needed small group and one-on-one time. The day that I was in MetLife Stadium, there were some pictures after the fact that like Oprah and Gail and a few people in her entourage like met Beyonce backstage. And I think Madonna was the same night, perhaps not, but she was one of the two nights here in New York. Madonna also, some of her kids got to meet Beyonce. A conversation between Beyonce and Oprah and Gayle and friends. I mean, first of all, that imagine being a fly on a wall for that. But what happens in that conversation is they are able to interact and adjust for just each other. It just makes sense. The less people you're talking to, the more you can directly meet their needs. And the same is happening here too. I am guessing what a whole bunch of you that might be tuning into this session might want to hear, what might be helpful. But if you and I were to have just a one-on-one conversation, or if your 8th grade team and I sat around a table, you could say, here are our challenges with small group instruction. What are your ideas? The less people we work with, the more we're able to tailor our conversation, right? Just makes sense. The same goes for small group instruction. We have kids who are stopped along the way that need that extra repetition and support. We have kids that are ready to move on to something else and wish that they could have your expertise on how to do that. Making small group work happen, or small group conferring happen inside of your classroom has huge, huge payoffs. So how do we do it? So I'm now going to make you Beyonce. Oh, ta-da, you're Beyonce. So first, just soak that in for a moment. You're an incredible artist and you're known throughout the world. You are very important. So now you are Beyonce. So let's Beyonce your small group instruction. So how could you possibly take all of the students that you see? Secondary teachers oftentimes have multiple classes. Elementary teachers maybe only have 1 or 2 classes, but you teach multiple subjects that you have to prepare for. Whatever it is, there are a lot of things that you have to deal with. How can you do this? So I want to give you some ideas. First, a big one, you have to make sure you can't even have small groups. A big part of that is time. You only get good at the things that you do. I only become a better cook if I cook. I only become a better skier if I ski. I only become a better singer if I sing. You only get good at the things that you practice. So one thing we have to do with our instruction is to really reflect on how much time do students have to practice versus how much time am I leading what's happening in the room. Now, in a perfect world, it might look like this, where you have a little bit of time that you are teaching and a lot of it of time that they're practicing. That would be great. The more time that students are practicing, that's better for their learning. The more time that they're practicing, that also gives you the opportunity to confer. That's where conferring goes. I could teach a class lesson. Now students are working. That's the time to pull small groups. If I don't have a pie chart like that, and a lot of the class period is either me talking or me directing what's going on, I can't possibly do small groups. So this is really one of the first things to think about. And yes, that helps with conferring, but it also just helps with learning in general. I only get good at what I do. So in a perfect world, every day looks like that. That's not reality. What tends to happen is some days my lesson isn't long. Other days, either by accident or on purpose, it went longer. Sometimes the lesson has to go long. Sometimes it just happened by accident. Whatever might be happening in your room, I would suggest that you think about this pie chart as an average. So the average of my week is this. Some days might be long, some days might be shorter. And if I had a couple of days where it was a lot of me and not a lot of student practice, I would recommend you just add at least a day a week where it's almost not you at all, right? Like that might be a class where you just say, hey, this week we've been working on our essays. Here's 3 things that I taught you this week. Work. And then you can work with small groups. So let's pause here for a moment. This is a perfect time for you to pause this video. If you're with others, you could talk. If you're by yourself, you could just reflect. But take a moment to just think, if we're going to make small group conferring happen at all, we have to make sure we're protecting that practice time. So just reflect on what that means for you and what are things you're already doing or you could do to adjust how much practice time students have in your room. All right, so you either paused or we're going to move ahead together, but after you've thought about that, So you've said, all right, I found ways that I can have as much practice time as possible so conferring can happen during that time. Now I'm going to spend a good chunk of our time here thinking about forming groups. I want to do this in like 80s, 90s workout video style, where I'm going to show you the like beginner way, the easiest way in. Then I'll show you a little bit more sophisticated, and then I'll suggest some like, what if you're really rocking and rolling and you want to go as far as you possibly can with small groups, where that might go. We're going to spend a lot of time because this is the most challenging but most important part of forming small groups. All right, so let's start with the easiest entry level. The entry level to forming small groups is so simple, you could do it the next time you're teaching, and that's this. You just think about who struggled with yesterday's lesson, and then you put them in a group, and you teach them. Ta-da, you have a small group. So I'm going to ask you to do that right now. Right now, pause or just think for a moment. Think of 3 to 4 specific students. Don't just think of the idea of students. Literally think of 3 to 4 students that you know need some help with recent teaching. Just really put them in your mind. 3 to 4 students needed help with a recent lesson. What did they need help with in that lesson? So 3 to 4 students that you know struggled. What did they struggle with? Ta-da! You have a small group. So if you need to, you can pause the video again to think more, or maybe you already thought of them quickly, but boom, now you formed a small group. So what we're going to do is start with that. That is the easiest way to form small groups. You could do it right now. And now I'm just going to gradually get a bit more sophisticated. And so 2 things are going to happen as we move along this session. The farther we move to the right, the more challenging, a bit more steps it takes to prepare, though not a ton, but it takes a bit more time. So there is some more work to do. However, there's a payoff. The farther we move to the right, the greater you're differentiating for student needs. If every time you pull small groups into a group, so U5 needed help with this lesson, come over here. If you're always pulling groups based on the lesson the day before, that's good practice for forming small groups. The challenge, though, is that you are still only differentiating for that one lesson. So if you're working on analyzing evidence, lesson on Monday, on Tuesday, you pull some students with you that need to work on that again. You work on it again with them. Now they go back to their seats. Wednesday, if you're no longer thinking about analyzing evidence, you're not supporting them with analyzing evidence, you're onto something else, those students only had one opportunity to practice. And again, there are students who get stuck along the path of our units of study. And if we leave them stuck, they kind of stall. And so this is a good place to start, but it's not the place that I suggest you always live in. It's a good place for practice, but I wouldn't always stick there. So let's move along this continuum. So the next kind of level up is I'd like you to think that small groups aren't just for students who need help. They also are for students who could get pushed ahead. So if you brought students together around analyzing evidence and they needed help with that, consider you could also pull a group of students who actually got yesterday's lesson really well, and now you could teach them other strategies of how to analyze evidence. Like perhaps yesterday you were showing them how to rephrase the point they were making. So the main idea of the paragraph is this. You pulled evidence, and now I'm going to rephrase how the main idea matches the evidence. That might be one way they were analyzing. Kids who needed support, you taught them that. Now, in this group that's extending that, perhaps you're showing them a mentor text. Here's an example of an essay. Look at some ways that this student is analyzing evidence. Like this student is citing more than one source, perhaps, or this student is trying to draw an analogy, or this student is relying on more than one character in the text to make their point. There's many ways I could extend that. So that might be the next step up. Okay, so those are already 2 that are pretty quick to do. Students who need help, come over here. Let me show it to you again. Students who got it really well yesterday, come over here. Let me give you some tips on how to go farther. That's a perfect place to start. So now let's go a little bit farther along this continuum and be more differentiated. This also involves you planning a bit ahead. So the first two on this continuum are things that you could do after the fact. What's good about that is you've already planned the lessons. So you already have all the stuff that you used. What perhaps isn't as good is it's not as differentiated. And also it isn't as good as you're always being reactionary, right? Like you're always looking for, okay, who had trouble with that? Now come over here. Now I'll figure out what to do with you. So it's always this like reaction that happens, which again, that's a fine place to start. In this next level up of how you might form small groups, here I'd like you to think about ways that you can plan ahead that allow for even more differentiation in your room, but also don't always have to feel like they're after the fact. So the next levels up are, instead of just basing who ends up in a small group on struggle that you already saw, now you're going to look into the future. You're going to use your teacher knowledge and your teacher hat. Even if this is your first year teaching and some of you are joining us today, very quickly you're going to learn things about students you already have so far this year. You can start making some predictions on what they might need. So this is looking into the future a bit. The third level up here in this continuum is that you don't form groups just based on struggle you saw. Instead, you look ahead to what are the skills of this unit that we're in, and what are some things I can predict students need to work on, and I can plan ahead for that. And what that allows you to do, the reason why this is even higher in differentiation, is that you're not just responding to lessons, you're thinking beyond individual lessons. So if you only had one lesson on transitions, but you know there are some students that are going to need some help with that, you could pull a group before you ever get to that lesson. You could pull groups after that lesson is already over. You also could meet with some students multiple times, checking on how transitions are going. You can plan that ahead of time. That becomes easier for you and helps you really differentiate more for student needs, not just based on lessons, but what goals that you have. The highest level up there is where you don't just think about only units, you think about skills in general. What are the standards saying? What are things that we need to work on? So how do you do that? So imagine that you are ready to plan ahead for needs that might come up. Here are 3 steps we'll try out together. First, you ask yourself, what are the absolute must-dos of this unit? Then you're going to predict, before you even get to the unit, as you're planning it, what are some strengths and needs that'll probably come up in this room? And that's how you can set the things you look for. When you set your look fors, once the unit starts rolling, you will know which groups you need to form. That also means you don't have to just be reactionary. When you're forming groups, you could actually plan those ahead of time. Let me show you what I mean. So let's go back to Beyonce. So when Beyonce is planning the Renaissance World Tour, she and her team are absolutely thinking about must-dos, not for their unit, but for the performance. What are must-dos? So in my analogy here, what are the songs that we have to perform? The fans will like them. So Dangerously in Love, we know they're going to want that. We know they're going to want songs off of various albums. We also know they're going to want some songs off of the new album. It's called the Renaissance Tour. Might as well come off the Renaissance album. So Virgo's Groove, great song. Energy, great song. So here's our set list. Now imagine that you are Beyonce and you're not just performing, but you also are a really great teacher too. And you want to know, how well do your fans know your songs? So you might then predict what are some strengths and needs that might show up. One of them is in the song Energy. If you don't know it, there's a lyric in the song Energy where she sings, "You look around, everybody on mute." And you may have already seen on social media, in her concerts, she sings this song, and There's a moment where she says, look around, everybody on mute. And what could happen, what tends to happen in the audience, is everyone in the entire stadium goes on mute. Everyone gets quiet. There actually are some really fun to watch compilations that some people have put together online showing different cities and how well everyone went on mute. And it turns out that parts of Europe, not so good going on mute. There's some cities in the US, not so good. Other cities, perfect. So imagine, here's my set list. These are the must-dos. What are some predicted strengths and needs? I imagine some people won't go on mute very well. And that leads you to look-fors. So what should I look for? I'm going to look for that. How well does everyone go on mute? Now, yes, Beyonce is just performing. She's not really paying attention to everything we're doing. However, if I wanted to teach people to go on mute during the song Energy, when I get to that point, if I already ahead of time have planned for it, this is something I want people to be able to do, so I'm going to look for it. When you get to that point, your awareness is raised. You're going to look specifically for that. And you could, if you wanted to, form a small group of the people who didn't go on mute and ruined it for everyone and frankly should be kicked out of the stadium. Well, I kind of mean that a little bit, but not totally. But when you decide what you're going to look for, it helps you to clarify and kind of weed out all of the extra noise that happens in a classroom, all of the busy things that happen during instruction. It helps you to focus on the stuff that's most important. And if you go through these steps, you're not just picking anything. Think about it this way. Students, let's say they are writing. So they're all writing stories. So you have students writing narratives. And when you walk around the room, there are so many things you notice. And it's possible, because I do this too, you walk around the room and you notice a student isn't punctuating dialogue. So you stop and you mention it to them. And then you notice another student's introduction isn't so great. They aren't really starting in the action. So you interrupt and point that out to them and move on. And then a student's having a hard time with spelling, and the student, right? There are so many different needs that are taking place in the classroom. And what starts to happen is you're giving little tiny spurts of advice, right? It's small little things that you're saying, and it might help that one student move a little bit ahead on their writing, but that's a really hard thing to keep track of in your teaching. And even more specifically, it's hard to remember what you said to everyone, right? And is the way that they introduce their story the most important thing for that student or for this unit? Does it really matter if they started with a quote or they started with a question, or does that matter? What's the most important things? So if instead of just reacting to student work and observations, you plan ahead of time and you start with the absolute must-dos first, that can help you to then decide, okay, what do I most need to look for? Then other stuff will happen. It doesn't mean you won't address small things, but your focus will be on the absolute must-dos. So now I'm making you Beyonce again. You are now Beyonce, or whatever your version of Beyonce is. So now you're Beyonce. So imagine if you're Beyonce, if you were an 8th grade teacher, you can put your own grade in, let's say 8th grade teacher. So here are, these are actually Georgia standards. Because I was doing some work with Atlanta Public Schools. So here's Georgia standards. However, you can put your own standards in. These follow very closely to the Common Core state standards. So if you're in a state that uses them, these will look very familiar. So I need to decide what are the must-dos in my unit. So imagine you're doing a generic narrative unit and you're using these literature standards for reading. I can look at these standards and ask myself, what are the must-dos? There are a lot of words here. There are a lot of standards, but what are some things that I absolutely have to do? What are things that, one way that I'll sometimes talk about this with teacher teams that I'm planning with is I'll say, when students leave your grade level, what are the things that you know they have to have that you'll be concerned if they don't? That's the kind of work you're doing. What are the must-dos? And through the power of Beyonce, because you are so magical and smart, you, my Beyonce educators, You can take the standards and turn them into a few must-dos. So of all the standards language, let's say these are your must-dos for this generic narrative unit. Help students determine theme, analyze the theme's development. From standard, I think it's 3, find lines of dialogue or incidents that happen, indicate and find ones that are important, and analyze their impact. That's it. Once I've determined those things, I'm going to do a lot of teaching this unit. Some lessons are really important, some are only sort of important, but I'm going to teach a lot of things. But if I have these 4 things in mind, I can continually look for them. I can see how students are doing with them, and I could form small groups on just these 4 things. And if I help students get better at just those 4 things, they will be closer to grade level standard. Whole class teaching will continue. Other things will come up, but I can hyper-focus my differentiation on just those 4 things, or heck, on those 3 things, or if you're new to this, pick just 2 things. But I'm starting with what are the must-dos? What are the greatest hits for this particular unit that we're in? From there, you then can start forming your groups. Now, for the short time that we're meeting, I don't have a lot of time to go into all of this, and please reach out to me. Be happy to answer questions, or if you and your district would like me to come work with you, we could go even farther into it. But one thing that can help you is to use some note-taking. If you scan that QR code, you'll go to the downloads page for some free downloadables on the EdCollabs website. I'm going to move past that QR code, but I'll come back to it. So if I have these must-dos, I could, you don't have to, but I could take a sheet like this, write student names down the left side, and then across the top where it says goals, I could list these most important things that must happen in the unit. So these are the ones I said might come out of your 8th grade standards, for example, in a generic narrative unit that you're teaching. Theme, analyze development, find important lines or incidents, analyze their impact. I could list those across the top. There they are. Do. And now when I'm observing students, when I'm collecting student work, when I'm talking to them as I walk around the classroom, I could still go around the room, right, and lean over shoulders, talk to students, but now I could have this sheet with me. And now look at how instead of looking for a million things, I might just be looking for 4. Other stuff might come up, sure, I'm not saying that you wouldn't, but what you're most looking for is those 4 things. So as you're walking around listening to conversations, maybe looking at what students are writing down, maybe things you talk to them about, and you're noticing, oh, here's a student who's pretty good at theme. Okay, I'm going to put a check plus in that column, or whatever note-taking you want. But I noticed they can find the theme, but they're struggling a bit with really analyzing development. They need more work on that. So maybe I'm going to put a minus or just a check, or I'll put a note in the box. Can do the same with the others. And as I go from student to student, I'm going to have this in my hand on a clipboard or in a folder, or I could even do a version of this digitally, but I can walk around, and as I'm having these small little conversations that we all have all day long, I can capture them somewhere. And what I'm looking for is now tied to the most important things in this unit, the ones that I know I have to focus on. What that allows you to do is not only to take some records, but here's just, I'm going to show this really quickly, but here's a teacher that did just this. She had her own note-taking system, and watch. When you look down a column, there's the QR again if you want to look again at these sheets, but I can look down this column, and here I can see kids at different levels of need. The ones in yellow, I could pull both of them, and I know they need extra support based on my note-taking. The ones in orange, maybe I could break them into 2 groups, or because there's so many, I know, you know what? Even though my unit plan says I've moved on past this skill, I've been seeing a lot of kids need help with it. I'm just going to teach the whole class again. So this sort of note-taking helps you to focus in what matters the most, look for it in students, and then you're forming small groups strategically. You could also do this with like a spreadsheet, for example, with Google Docs. You could share this with even co-teachers or specialists, other people that work with similar students. You could all take notes on that same sheet. So here's a point. If you'd like to, you could pause and either alone, if you're alone, or together with colleagues, think about a current or upcoming unit that you have and just try these same steps. Even if you're not at the point where you want to quite lead in this way, or you don't want to take notes, or wherever you are, just try this out right now. So think of an upcoming unit. What are the absolute must-dos? There's a million things to teach, but what are the, if they leave my class without being able to do that, that's not okay. What are the must-dos? Do that first. Then ask yourself, what are the predicted strengths and needs, even if you haven't taught the unit yet? Because remember, this is pre-planning. This will help you be more focused and plan ahead. So based on those must-dos, what do I predict some strengths and needs will be in the room? And now I can set look-fors. And if you'd like to, I could put them on a sheet like this. So this could be a good time to pause if you'd like to stop and think about that. All right, either you paused or we're going to keep on going. So in our short time that we have left, I want to give you a few ideas about leading these groups. And again, this is a much longer conversation. There are districts that I've worked on. I work on many things with districts, but around small group conferring, there are some districts I've worked with that it's been the only focus we've had all year. So there certainly is a lot to talk about. This is just to help you get some ideas and get moving. So a few quick ideas on leading small groups. Remember that pie chart we talked about earlier? Small groups can only happen, small group conferring, if you have a lot of protected practice time. That's where that individualized differentiated teaching goes. Well, the same thing is true for small groups. When you have students in front of you, if you spend most of that time talking at them and showing them things, it's really hard to know how they're absorbing that teaching and applying it. You won't know, right? And we all have been guilty of this. You give a student a suggestion, do this, and then you walk away and go on to something else. And you have no idea if they did it or not, right? You're just kind of like, I hope you do it, bye. If you're taking the time to form strategic groups and you're being thoughtful about who ends up in that group, it's equally important that you also decide, how am I going to protect practice time for them? How will I make sure that they aren't just listening to me talk about a thing they need to do, they're actually doing it? So here are some quick suggestions for that. So let's look at you as Beyonce. In this particular image that I've been using over and over again, what do you notice? Where's the microphone facing? It's facing out. She's not singing. This is a point she's doing something in this photo that a lot of our favorite artists do. They sometimes like to have the audience sing songs back to them. This happened when I was at MetLife Stadium. It was really fun. It actually is pretty moving to hear the whole entire audience singing along. We were singing, was it Love on Top? It's the one where you oh yeah, it was Love on Top, where you just keep going up and up, higher and higher. And she didn't stop us, so we just kept going, love on top, na, na, key change, na, 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 na. But it was awesome. But anyway, I digress. So here she's holding the microphone out. Think about small group instruction in that same way. I want to have the microphone at me for only a short amount of time. The rest of the time, I want you working. If you're pulling small groups on the first part of that continuum that we started with, where it might just be off of yesterday's lesson or a recent lesson, this is the easiest small group to have. Just use what you already planned. Use the lesson you already taught with the class. Pull 3, 4, 5 students near you, not too many. And it literally would look like this. Hey, I pulled you together because of that thing we did yesterday. I saw you were struggling with it. Here's the example again. And maybe it's on your laptop, or if you're writing on a notebook, or you have a book that you use, whatever it is. Here's that example again. Remember it? Right now, work. While you're working, I'm going to watch you. So for example, let's say it's back to narrative writing. Maybe yesterday's lesson, you were teaching students 3 types of details that can make their stories sound more like stories. You can add action, dialogue, and setting. There's plenty more, but here's 3. I can say to the class, hey, remember yesterday when we were working on adding 3 types of details to make our stories sound like stories: action, dialogue, thinking. Right now, I'm going to watch you while you look at your drafts and you try to add action, dialogue, thinking. Ready, go. Now that pie chart is super short. I've just reminded them of something we've already done because we literally already did it. And then my work becomes even more differentiated. I can just lean over if I have them near me and see how it's going. Oh, hey, what are you noticing? Oh, yeah, you're seeing that you actually don't have that much dialogue. Great. What do you think you could add? Show me a part where you could add some dialogue. What would characters say there? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. All right, good. Keep going. Hey, what did you notice? Oh, you need some help? Okay, let me look at the work with you. Well, when I look here, I'm seeing that it looks like there's a lot of setting in this first part. Could you right now read the rest of that first page of your draft? And could you put an S next to every time you see setting? And let's just see, do you do that a lot or was that only in the beginning? Okay, try that out. And then when you're done, I'll help you look at it again. Okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? That becomes my group. Mostly the microphone is turned out so that they can practice and I can just look in and give help and support. So now let's imagine you're at the planning ahead stage. So you want to work on not just yesterday's lesson and be only in reaction to what's happened. You want to plan ahead in the way we talked about earlier. So these involve you doing a bit of planning ahead. So let's say you've determined theme is an issue. This is something I know is going to come up. Some students will struggle with it. One way you can plan, and there's many more, and we could talk about it some other time, but there's many more. One way you can plan is to list the strategies you already know for finding theme, or go find some. Find some by asking colleagues, find some by attending days like the gathering, find some by reading books, reading blog posts, either list or find. Because you're planning ahead, you have time to do it. If you're just reacting to what happened in class, you will have no time because you have a lot to do. But if this is at the stage of planning ahead for the unit that's coming, why not plan for ways you could differentiate too? So just think rhetorically with me. What are a bunch of ways that you help students find theme? You could probably list some right now. Chances are in your unit, you're teaching one or maybe two, right? Like it might be, okay, we're going to figure out what a character learns. Great, that's a whole class lesson. But by planning ahead, you can assume that students might need other ways of doing that same work. So I could list or find other ways of finding themes. So I could say, well, what are ones I already know? I could teach a small group the lesson we already taught, but if I'm planning ahead, I could also teach them to also look for character change, figure out the point of change, and then reflect on, so what bigger ideas this text teaching us based on how that character changed? Or I could look for key relationships. And what is this text teaching us about relationships? I could look at different conflicts that exist. Like a lot of us in secondary teach things around conflict. So what is person versus world? What could a theme be from that? What is person versus person? What's a theme from that? What's person versus nature? Does that come up in this text that we're reading? What theme comes up there? If you just start listing strategies you already know, or you go find some, those all become things that you can differentiate for. So I know that we're getting close to the end of our time here. I hope that this has inspired you for some ways that you can Beyonce your class, and not just teaching whole class lessons, but also thinking about ways that you can meet with and address small groups of students' needs, keeping in mind points of turning the microphone towards them, thinking about ways that you can differentiate and decide on maybe some must-dos that help you decide look-fors, and perhaps some note-taking like this could help you. What I would suggest you do is either now or when this session is over, is to just pause to think, what are some of your own next steps? Beyonce is going to make our suggestion that we should try one thing, reflect on how it went, and then revise it. So I invite you to do that. What are some of your own next steps to think about or create small group instruction in your room? Just a reminder, I'm going to plug one more time. I would love to hear from you. You can use the hashtag #TheEdCollab and tag me at @IChrisLehman and or tag @TheEdCollab. And I'm happy to talk with you online over Twitter or somewhere else that we find ourselves. I also love to work with schools and districts on lots of things related to literacy and content literacy. Small group instruction is one of them. So if you or your district is interested in having my support or any of my colleagues at the Ed Collab support, please feel free to use that QR code. It'll take you to my bio on the page, but there you'll also find links to making some professional development requests as well too. So I hope you enjoyed this session and you enjoy the rest of the Ed Collab. Also, don't forget, if this session and others have made an impact on you, please pay that joy forward. Please click on the charity link up on the top bar of our webpage, and there you can learn about our gatherings, adopted charities. And we'd love for you to pay the joy forward because the gathering is totally free. You didn't have to pay anything to attend. You could take what you would normally spend on coffee or attendance or even travel and think about ways of paying that joy forward to some charities that support others. Right. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you have a great rest of your gathering, and I hope that we stay in touch. Take care, everyone.